Welcome inside another episode of Mic Drop here, brought to you by Believe and available everywhere you get your podcast and on Sirius XM stations everywhere. Mike Asti here, and this is going to be another Steelers edition of the show. It is NFL draft season, knee deep now in the off season, and the Steelers are just always talked about by everybody throughout every off season. And are they really making big changes, or maybe was that all talk? To have this conversation, I am going to be joined by my friend and colleague Nick Fairbaugh of Penn Live. Had him on the show a bunch, worked with him in the past, and maybe going to be seeing him coming up at the NFL Combine. We'll both be there covering. He'll be covering a lot of Steelers, and I'll be trying to dip into a lot more of the national coverage and maybe some of what I cover with West Virginia players and Pittsburgh as well. So, Nick, how you been? I do see you have your hair slicked back. Give a hair update for Nick Fairbaugh every time you appear. It's not always the same.
Yeah, I do. And we're doing well. I'm doing well. Off season's in full bloom. It's kind of the lull, I guess, in the off season before the storm. Right, 2 weeks from now we'll be all in Indianapolis talking the draft.
Yep.
Week after that, really is the gear up towards free agency. And then obviously free agency happens, and then it's pro day and then draft. So this is like the calm before the storm, right? These 2 weeks after the Super Bowl, or the calm before the storm, and then here we go. That's really what it is.
And with the Super Bowl flirting with mid-February these days, you don't get as much of a break really from our youth, and the NFL calendar really never sleeps. But yeah, the cliched adage is very, very true. This is the calm before the storm. Although, Nick, when it comes to covering the Steelers, there's really never a full-on calm, because in the calm periods, you still get a lot of Steeler rumors. They're always talked about nationally, no matter what's going on, and we will get to maybe what's BS and what's not. This is now the period for the fan has to really get in tune with what's legit because there's a lot being thrown at the wall right now. Before we get there, though, and play a game of BS meter, this offseason, kind of like last offseason, where that was the offseason that Rooney came out there and said there's a sense of urgency, got to start winning playoff games. He's also frustrated of the last decade with the fans. And then this offseason, you get comments from Art Rooney II about, well, changes are going to be made. I don't think anyone really believed it be Mike Tomlin, even though that was talked about more than really any other offseason, and we all have our opinions about it. But changes will be made. Doesn't really appear like any big changes are going to be made. They've flirted with some maybe big changes, and they've made some minor moves. People reported that they were thinking about things, but in terms of big changes, nothing's really moving the needle right now. When he said that, did you believe that it was going to be different and big changes were going to be made? Because he did make those exact comments that have not really been made in the past. And what are your thoughts on what the Steelers have done so far with the staff? Because it is another year of Tomlin. There's still the vote of confidence for Tomlin. Say what you want about that. I've had my opinions that I do kind of think the tenure maybe should have ended, but nonetheless, another season of Tomlin. But around him, big changes are not really happening, even though it was said that they were going to.
Yeah, I didn't really expect it. I mean, if you could, I thought maybe Terrell Austin would be gone.
Okay.
But let's be real. That entire offensive staff is just about brand new. Really, I mean, Pat Meyer was the one that maybe you could have talked about moving on. They didn't even do that. I mean, and again, I don't even really think those are huge changes, right? If you're talking about big changes, well, to me, that's moving on from both coordinators, showing uncharacteristic things that you would do, right? Moving off a coordinator after 1 year, when the Steelers ever done that? They don't.
Yep.
So, that's something that would have shown me that there's urgency. Instead, they lose their two up and coming coaches, which is actually kind of funny. They chose to move on from Grady Brown, which is, I think, a mistake, but we'll see. I think they did make a good hire with Gerald Alexander at the very least there. We'll see who they get for the inside linebackers coach. But the Steelers are kind of looking at it right now, and I think most of the changes that we talked about are going to come from personnel. I think that's probably where it's going to come from.
Yeah.
Probably they're going to get a big name receiver. I'm assuming that's going to come at some point. They're probably going to load up on the defensive line. They're going to get corners. So they're going to fix those. And then who knows what's going to happen at quarterback. I mean, they're really in a rut there. But no, I didn't really think the changes were going to be anything significant. at all. And I don't even think they really even gave you a scapegoat. I think Aaron Curry's contract
Mhm.
ran out. I don't know if the Steelers chose to move on from him or if the Jets just offered more money. His contract was expiring. Um, and hey, the Steelers could still move on from Carl Dunbar and Denzel Martin as well. They could have an entirely new defensive coaching staff, basically, if that happens. We'll see. Aside from Terrell Austin, of course. But we will see how that goes out. They also were on expiring deals. But right now, I mean, it's not a lot of big changes, and that's Mike Tomlin's defense. So
Yeah.
Mike Tomlin's going to be the one to change. I think sometimes maybe, I don't know how much of a big change we're going to know until they take the field next year. Because I think the biggest change can come from him, right? Mike Tomlin can make his own biggest change. And so if they're really going to make big changes, maybe we'll see it next September. But I don't know. I think there's a lot of skepticism, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I definitely think it's rightfully so. Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here, Mike Drop on Believe and Sirius XM. Why do you think you've been covering the Steelers a long time? So have I. We're been following the team forever. Is it just lip service? Because I don't think Rooney is fooling himself to what fans are saying out there. He has to be aware, which is maybe why he's making some of these comments. Why do you think we're getting comments from him? Because to be fair to the fans, I do think why there was more conversation of will there be big changes? Oh, finally there'll be big changes, kind of a celebration of big changes, even separate from Tomlin opinions, is because Rooney was saying this. This was comments from the Steelers, and even last year, the sense of urgency that was said from the Steelers. Why do you think we're hearing more of that directly from the top of the franchise and then no moves are made? We both agree it's uncharacteristic to move on from a coordinator year one. It's uncharacteristic to fire a coach that's won a championship, even if it was a decade and a half ago. It's uncharacteristic to do big things. It's even uncharacteristic, really, to trade high draft picks for some of these rumors we're going to get into. But they're the ones saying things. They're maybe the ones leaking things. So if they're not going to do anything in terms of the staff, why say it?
I think they view the personnel as big enough change. That's my guess. They consider big change different than what you and I would consider big
I
change, right?
guess. So I
Uh,
guess.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
the obvious answer is that they consider big change different than what you and I consider big change. I mean, listen, if they did trade for Debo Samuel or Cooper Cup, that's not a typical Steelers move either. They don't really trade
Sure.
for star wide receivers with big salaries every year. They don't go out and make big free agent signings. They're probably going to make maybe 2 or 3 of those this year. They have the room to make a lot of splash in free agency. So I would imagine that's what we mean by big change. I think we're going to see a
Okay.
good deal of upheaval in the roster turnover. I mean, just thinking about it, you can at least have one of the quarterbacks gone, maybe both. I don't think Najee Harris is going to be back. There maybe
That's
George
not getting
Pickens is
talked about
gone.
enough. Harris is not getting talked about enough, local or nationally, but yeah, I'd imagine he's not back.
Right. I mean, George Pickens could be traded.
Sure.
They're probably going to cut Larry Ogunjobi. I mean, they're going to make changes here.
That'd be
I
big
imagine they're
change.
going to have 2 starting new cornerbacks. So you're just going to have, you're going to have at least probably 5 or 6 new starters next year. I mean, when you were talking about a football team in context, that is
Mhm.
a pretty big chunk of your starting line. I mean, that's 6 of 22, and that's plus the depth you're going to add. So I think they're considering that big changes. I don't know why they're going all in on that if they're not going to change the staff themselves, unless
Yeah.
the change is going to come from the people already here. Is Arthur Smith suddenly going to change his scheme and come out with different tweaks? Is Mike Tomlin going to change his defensive scheme or the structure and the hierarchy of this? I think that's potentially maybe where it comes from. So if that's
Yeah.
the change, as I said, Mike, we're not going to know about that until September. Where if Mike Tomlin
Yeah.
starts coming out and the Steelers have been a very cover 3, cover 1 heavy defense. If they come out next year and start playing a bunch of Vic Fangio cover 2, then
Right.
and they blitz a lot and it's a
Yeah.
Flores scheme or something. You know what I mean? Like if we see these changes, then it's different. If Arthur Smith all of a sudden goes into a completely different offense, we'll be able to see it, but we won't be able to see it for 6-7 months. So
Yeah.
maybe that's the big changes. It seems like there's a lot of internal banking personally on that change. Rob.
Yeah, maybe more big changes are to come. Maybe they do mean the roster, and we've seen a little bit of doing uncharacteristic things like going for Minka, trading up to get him in the draft, or trading for him and then screwing a draft, but having that be their selection, trading up to get a Devin Bush, and obviously that not working out. So they've done in the last 5+ years, they've done kind of uncharacteristic things. This is now a new regime in there. And maybe you could argue shaking up the whole quarterback room last year, even though it wasn't like they spent tons of money. They got Russ on a major discount and only got a 6th round pick for Fields. They maybe are doing it again now. Maybe you could argue that was uncharacteristic at that time too for what the Steelers do. So maybe those are kind of big changes. They're going to do more of that, bringing in a high-priced wide receiver to say it's win now mode. Maybe that will be a big change. Yeah, I mean, because saying it and doing nothing different, and maybe it's just scheme and personality, and maybe they're going to literally hire somebody to single-handedly work on clock management or single-handedly work on reviews, and maybe Tomlin will relinquish that even more so, and maybe they're hearing some of that criticism. But if not, I don't think they're fooling anybody. So if there's any thought, oh, we're going to say this and then not change, the fans are not. I mean, they're not getting fooled here. Nick Faribault, Mike Asti here on Mic Drop. I do want to now play a game of BS meter. You mentioned some of it. A lot of rumors going on. Fans really do need to keep a close eye on what's BS and what's not. This is that time. This is tis the season for a lot of BS until you really get fully into more of the draft. And we'll talk a little bit about of the draft before we've let you go here on this episode of the show. So going down the line of some rumors, reports, just give me a 1 to 10 where this falls on your BS meter. 10 meaning it's just complete BS and someone literally is making this up, or 1 where maybe it's legit reporting, maybe it's just factual. It could even be legit reporting. Doesn't mean you definitely think it's going to happen, but where you are on, maybe you want to give it off of what you think is going to happen too. You mentioned kind of alluding to a couple big roster moves that will be made, maybe a wide receiver or so. So on the BS meter, we got to start with what everyone's talking about and the report that they inquired about Trevor Lawrence and to see what it would take to go get him. That would be a little uncharacteristic off of what we said when they brought in Fields. It was a 6th round pick in a trade. When they got Russell Wilson, they were, Denver was paying 99% of that salary basically. This, they'd have to give up more. It's hard to believe why someone would just make up that report, but there's a debate there whether that's legit or not. I don't think it's going to happen, but where are you in the BS meter? The Steelers are actually going after Trevor Lawrence or even made that phone call.
Yeah, I don't really see it. I mean, that's a 9 to me. I haven't heard
Okay.
anything about Trevor Lawrence and the Steelers. I haven't even heard of a conversation taking place in that regard.
Okay.
So I do not believe that happened one bit.
Okay.
I'm sure if maybe the Steelers did make a call and they'd be like, "Hey, is he open?" But it probably didn't get past anything other than no, hang up the phone. Like if that's what it was, then that's all it was. I don't know. Maybe it happened in a secret conversation on Shad Khan's yacht in New Orleans. I don't know, but
Yeah, maybe there's no record of this because there's no phone call. They just were standing next to each other somewhere.
right,
Yeah.
right. But I haven't heard anything there. Certainly nothing. That report also had draft picks attached to it. Certainly nothing that has even thrown out that amount. So yeah, this is not real. It's
Yeah.
fake.
I
It
hear
really
you.
is.
I think it's fake and BS too, but the only odd thing that tempts me to go 8 instead of a 9 is, I mean, it is a professional journalist that threw out this initially. Like, it's not just a random fan, not necessarily somebody covering football all the time, but this is somebody with some credibility. Like, even if you're covering other sports, if you throw out a legit report that you feel is legit, I guess, about another team, even, or another sport, you still generally wouldn't want to do that if you're just making it up. Like, I don't know, maybe his info's bad and he shouldn't have went with what he heard, or maybe he was standing next to somebody at a yacht and thought he heard something, but it wasn't even who he thought he heard because it was dark outside. I don't know, but that's the only reason that it's a little odd of where this is coming from, that it is somebody who's has some level of resume that shouldn't just be making things up, but that's the world we're living in, so it does feel like BS. Where are you on the 1 to 10 BS meter that the Steelers have any interest in Aaron Rodgers, because now he is available officially. The Jets even officially announced this, so this is not even a question off of rumors or reporting anymore. There only really are a handful of teams that need a quarterback. You'd imagine he's going to want to go to a contender. He's made comments about liking Mike Tomlin in the past. If the Steelers make different moves, they've been a playoff team. Maybe you could argue they are a contender. It's a debate on what he has left in the tank, but he did play better down the stretch. He won't be a Jet. Do you think the Steelers are even legitimately interested?
I mean, that one feels more plausible in some regards. You know about the mutual respect between Mike Tomlin and Aaron Rodgers. Now, I'll say this: I haven't necessarily heard anything connecting those.
Okay.
I haven't really heard that the Steelers are over the moon for it. But I do think that the Steelers are probably going to probe that at least a little bit, and kind of see at least where it is. And Rodgers can talk to teams now. Basically, it's kind of
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
how Russ, so they can just place a call to him and be like, okay, what do you want? How would this look? What would you be willing to do? I think, that's probably more of a 4. And the reason I say 4 is because I'm sure they're going to have exploratory interest. I don't think they're going to sign him. I don't foresee that happening. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. If you're just going to bring back a veteran, I personally would just go with, if you're going to bring back a veteran that is not, a top 10 quarterback, just resign Russ. Like, just resign Russ. He knows the system at least. And I mean, it's not like with Rodgers, you're getting a guy that's not going to bring headlines to the locker room. I mean, this guy's going to bring massive locker room. I don't want to say
100%.
issues, but headlines, and maybe sometimes those turn into issues. Because I do think actually his teammates do like him, from what I've heard in
Yeah.
outside of Garrett Wilson. Garrett Wilson did not,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
everyone else, it
Yeah.
seems like, really did like him in New York. But there is obviously the talk around Aaron Rodgers all the time. I think the biggest thing for me is Aaron Rodgers was clearly diminished as a player last year. The arm is solid still, but he could not move in the pocket. He was a sitting duck. And he's just not the same player he was before he tore his Achilles. So um,
100%.
we'll kind of see where that goes. But I'm sure the Steelers will have some level of interest in him, but I don't really think that he is 100%, going to come to Pittsburgh. I don't even know what his market's going to look like. Is he going to want to
Yeah,
play? Just tell me
that's the
there's nobody
thing.
else there.
This isn't like Rodgers 2 years ago. I mean, the market is really not there. The teams that people are saying called and had interest and are calling and things like that, people bringing up Tennessee, even Indianapolis, they're not teams that are on the cusp of doing any kind of winning, whether you add Rodgers or not. So what are his options is a whole nother conversation. I mean, Cleveland, when you look at teams that would need a quarterback, it also sounds like that if it goes across the ticker, that somehow, because this makes him different than a couple years ago too, it's not like you have to give him a mega deal. He maybe would, you could sign him for a lot less money than what he would have made during his prime. And there is a debate on whether or not he'd be a better option on the field than Russell Wilson. Obviously, he's not nearly a 4-time MVP, but if you need a year and a half to recover from an Achilles, his numbers were way better the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season. And Russell Wilson can't really move around as much either. If you think he's better, like, would you criticize that move if you get breaking news the Steelers sign Rodgers, he agrees to a way reduced deal, he thinks they're the best team? Do you think that's a good move, or would you say, man, that's not a good move then?
I think it's hard to criticize any move too hard this year. I'm going to be real with you. I'm just not sure it matters. I just don't. This doesn't look like a Super Bowl winning roster to me.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
going to have to play a very good quarterback, probably no matter what in the playoffs, right? You're going to have to beat a Lamar, a Mahomes, an Allen, a Herbert, someone like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm there's just no good answers really on the market this year, except for Matt Stafford. If he's available, that's the move you maybe take the swing for. He's a
Yeah.
legitimate top 10 quarterback still, even though he's old. He has not diminished yet. He would be the guy to take the swing on. But I mean, Aaron Rodgers is really no different than Kirk Cousins. It's really no different than Russell Wilson.
And he's
Russ
older. And
and
he's older now.
Russ, I think Russ is probably going to be the most expensive out of the three.
Right.
Rodgers probably the second, and then obviously I think if Cousins gets released, he'll just go with the vet min. So I guess you're looking from a cost-effective standpoint. I don't know. I don't know how much you
Okay.
can criticize. If they sign Rodgers for a 1-year deal, I mean, it's not an inspiring move, but everyone's going to crash out about it. And I just don't have high expectations for this team next year, anyways. It just feels like they're on a collision course for 10-7 wild card is. Like it does feel
Yeah.
like that. And the biggest thing, if Rodgers is there, to me is maybe you get a little magic. Maybe you do, right? The Steelers popped in a bottle for a few weeks, Russ's magic, and then it
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
back down to earth. Maybe you can find a little Rodgers magic, and maybe with Rodgers, you almost certainly will get Devontae Adams too, so that'll be a boost probably
Right.
to the Steelers'
Right.
offense. But I
Yeah.
don't know. I'm not sure it moves the needle for much for me. I wouldn't criticize it heavily. It's just I don't think Russ coming back. I don't think re-signing Justin Fields. I don't think signing Kirk Cousins. I don't think signing Aaron Rodgers. I don't think any of those moves the needle for me, really.
Yeah, and I don't disagree at all. I mean, that's keeping it real, and that's the interesting, semi-funny and sad state of affairs here. Really, you get sense of urgency from Rooney 2 years ago. You get big changes comment from him this year, and it does feel like that no matter what they do, this is not a championship team this year, based on the landscape, based on teams that are still going to be contenders, etc. Nick Farabaugh, Mike Asti here, Mike Drop on Believe and Sirius XM. And I mean, the only thing is guaranteed and will move your needle, Nick, is you'll be writing a lot of Rodgers stories, whether it's on the field or off the field. If they do sign him, he'll be more than willing to give you his opinion. He will likely still be appearing in the McAfee show, which reports came out. The Jets asked him to not, if in any way they were going to bring him back, even though it clearly feels like they didn't really want to bring him back. It almost feels like, Nick, we've both been around media long enough. It almost feels like the Jets went to him and said, okay, or it almost feels like they had a meeting separately and they decided once Aaron Glenn was hired, they don't want Rodgers back, which makes sense for them. And then they had a meeting with Rodgers in which they said, okay, if you agree to 17 things that we know you're going to hate and never agree to, we'll consider it, because in the back of their mind, they knew he wouldn't do all that. Like, they didn't want him. They didn't want him anymore. So they made it a very unattractive situation for him where, like, anything else you can do in life, you ban, and you just got to play football, which Rodgers is never going to agree to. But moving down the line here in the BS meter, we mentioned a little some of these other. I mean, this is going to receivers. Mentioned, they're going to get a big time receiver. It does feel like that could be the one difference this offseason. They're in so many rumors, and some of this is reporting. Deebo Samuel, where are you on the BS meter for Deebo Samuel? This is now the second offseason. They're in rumors, reports for a 49ers cast off. He has the ability to go talk to teams as well, based on what the Niners granted him, to try to get himself traded to a solid destination. I'm sure they're not the only team looking for him, and they're not the only team in reports and rumors for him. But does Deebo Samuels make sense? Do you believe that Deebo Samuels could likely be a Pittsburgh Steeler?
That's a one or two. That's completely likely. 100%. They're interested. He's interested. They tried to trade for him last year.
Yeah.
Everything is true. they are interested in Deebo Samuel, and you can see why. He's basically just supersized Cordero Patterson. Like, he really is. Screen game, backfield work, yak monster. Cordero Patterson was just done last year. He was just washed. But before he was washed in Atlanta, you go back and watch him. He was doing what Deebo was doing a lot, and Art Smith loves that type of guy. 100% it makes sense for them if they can get him on a reasonable kind of cost situation.
Sure.
First of all, does he even get traded or does he get cut? I think that's the question. So are you going to be competing with him on the open market against other teams, or are you trading a 6th round pick for him? I don't think it's going to take much more than that, maybe a 5th round pick.
Right.
He's going to be owed $17.5 million if you trade for him. So you're bringing on a hefty contract if you do trade for him. He's coming off his worst year in the NFL. Really, honestly, he didn't have the top gear he once had. He still has his yak superpower. Of those 640 yards he had last year, I believe 450 of them were after the catch, so he could still create. The Steelers basically do not have that in their offense, so that would be a nice boost to their offense to have a guy that they can work in the screen game and do that. He's a risk big time. I think he's a big time risk just because, again, we saw the tools declining. He's so physical. There's a lot of mileage on his body, more so than most guys that are 29 years old. But he fits what they do, and he kind of gives them something they don't have. And so I do think he fits the offense. There's just a lot of risk, but I think they're definitely interested. I don't think that's BS at all. I think they're definitely interested. I'm not sure it's a great move, but I think, whether it's for a 6th round pick or you sign him in free agency, I mean, bring in talent. I don't think he could be the move at wide receiver. I think he's a move. He's one
Okay.
of 2 or 3 moves that you make to fill out that room. But I do think he can add something to the room that they don't have right now.
Yeah, and it also feels like he could easily be the easiest move to make in terms of the receiver room because out of a splash move, he could be the cheapest move to make, whether it be signing him or even off of a trade. Because as you mentioned, he is coming off his worst season. If they were trying to get him 2 years ago and they've been making calls for him for at least one other year, it would have been a lot higher of a price. He had a 1,400 year. Now he's barely getting to 700 yards. What do you get out of him is a different story. And is he even that loving the Steelers based on their question mark at quarterback? But that's one that almost everyone agrees is legit. Cooper Kupp, where are you in the BS meter for Cooper Kupp? There's even a whole conversation that why are the Rams breaking this damn thing up? Because they were on the verge of advancing through the playoffs. That's a whole nother maybe show. But they almost traded him in the middle of the season, and then they announced that, hey, we're still in the race, so we're going to keep this man. They got through the postseason and they lost to the Eagles, who won the Super Bowl. But unfortunately for Kelly Stafford, it looks like Kupp's going to, maybe not be there. And who knows about her and her husband. Do you think Cooper Kupp, though, with the Steelers makes sense and that could be a thing if you're thinking that another move besides Samuel will have to be made? That would definitely be a splash move, at least with Kupp's resume.
Yeah, but he's not what he used to be either. He's been hurt a
Yeah.
lot. He had one of his least productive seasons last year. And he is a slot receiver. I mean, listen, Deebo Samuel also does most of his work out of the slot. The Steelers already have 2 slot receivers in Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin III. At least Deebo plays a little bit more outside. It's one or the other. Again, I think they're interested in Kupp. I do. I think they're going to be interested in any of these guys. I think,
Okay.
if you Devontae Adams, they're going to be in on him. They're going to be in on T. Higgins. They're going to be in on Chris Godwin. Like, they're going to
I
be
was
in
going to
on
get to
all these
Higgins.
guys.
Yeah. Okay.
They're going to land one of them. They're going to. They might land 2 of them. We'll see. But like interest in Kupp is like a 2. They're going to be interested. It just depends on who. They're not going to trade for Kupp and Samuel though. That doesn't fit. It's going to be like Deebo and Darius Slayton, or Cooper Kupp and Darius Slayton, or Nick Westbrook-Akine, or someone like that.
Okay.
That makes sense. But yeah, no, they're going to be in on Kupp. I have some similar issues with Kupp that I have with Deebo. They're different players, but they're both injured. They're both aging. Both have a lot of miles on their body. They're
Yeah.
not superstars they once be. They're still useful players. Don't get me wrong, still useful players. But I do think it would be very Steelers, I would say, over the last few years when they have brought in guys like Allen Robinson and Patrick Peterson, guys that were
Mm-hmm.
once great that are now over the hill. Cordero Patterson fits into this pattern too,
Yeah.
where they're just kind of late to the party on some of these guys, man. Like, it's the downturn of these guys' career. And I mean, the way to get obviously guys at their elite points is to draft them. They just haven't drafted well enough to have elite talent like that. But
They were doing it for a while, but yeah, not
right, it's been
recently.
hard sledding. But I
Yeah.
mean, we'll see. I'm sure they're going to make 1 or 2 moves in free agency here. But again, Kupp interest is probably very true.
Yeah, those do feel legit, and I was going to mention Huggins, but he feels legit as well. Or I was going to mention Higgins, but he feels legit as well. But yeah, what you're saying is exactly what they've been doing. It almost seems like there's a little bit of trying to splash with big names, but they're getting them at the end, and their name is bigger than what they're actually going to get out of them now. If this was 2 years ago, I think we would agree. If this was 2 years ago, and the Rams called and said, "Hey, Kupp's available," they wouldn't pay that price because at that point, Kupp's not far removed from a Super Bowl MVP. They're not gonna do that even for Samuel, etc. They're getting players where their value is the lowest. That's how they got Russell Wilson. That's even how they got Justin Fields. They're getting players when their value is the lowest, so they bring them in and they don't have to give up much for them. Fields and Wilson were both low risk moves. And you could argue the high reward wasn't there, but they are low risk moves. A lot of these are low risk moves. I want to get you some draft needs from you, but before fully get there, just want to ask you then, we talked a lot about the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, things like that. If they're going to bring Wilson, Fields back, Rooney basically said he wants to bring one of them back, but not both of them. Wouldn't maybe make sense to bring both of them back. They both would need contracts. What do you think they're going to end up with quarterback wise, and what should they do? Like, what is the room going to look like for you? I mean, we're still early in this offseason. Moves like this weren't made until more March last year, but They're going to be focused on the combine and then have to start making some real decisions after that's over.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would do is probably just re-sign Justin Fields. I think that's smart. Um, I'd look at Fields and say, okay, he's a solid enough player, and you have upside. He's the young guy that actually has upside to maybe be a long term answer. I don't think he is, but at least he has the ability to be that potentially.
Right.
So I imagine that's what I would do. I think that's the way the Steelers are leaning. So I think this probably looks something like Justin Fields, a vet option. Could be Kyle Allen coming back. It could be Cooper Rush. Could be Jacoby Brissett. Could be someone in that vein.
Okay.
Skylar Thompson, then a late draft pick. That's kind of what I'm feeling. I really think that's where things are starting to go. I don't think that anyone's particularly enthused by that room, but I just
Yeah.
I think there's a few. And again, I think Russ is probably a less likely option. I don't really think that they view Aaron Rodgers and Kirk Cousins as wow, I can't wait to sign that guy. I don't think they want to be the team to shell out 40 million to Sam Darnold. I don't think
Right.
they want to do any of those things. And so I think their best option is let's ride the wave one more year to a better quarterback class in 2026 and let's make that big move. So that's kind of what I see there. So
Yeah.
Fields, some vet bridge option in case Fields gets hurt or things just go
Yeah.
super south. Skylar Thompson, and then a late draft pick.
Yeah. And that would be typical Steelers. That would make sense. That's kind of what I'm feeling like as well. And that's probably the safest bet for them because if nothing else, Fields, you would think maybe would come cheaper than any of the other guys we're talking about. You would imagine he's still the youngest. There's still maybe talent there. They could sell in the presser. They're going to bring up 4-2 and that he showed flashes before they handed it to Wilson. And then fans will get mad they did. But this will be a whole new year. So that seems actually like Nick, even though that won't make anybody enthused, there will be no parades over it. That actually seems like the consensus opinion among the fans, knowing what the Steelers may realistically will do, that they would prefer that versus an Aaron Rodgers or Wilson room instead of Fields. Like you might as well make Fields the QB1 if you're going to do that and then have another vet there. But it seems almost like that's the more popular situation for the Steelers, and they don't always make the popular moves. But yeah, that seems likely. And then see what you get out of Fields one more time. He's a former first round pick. You could argue the Bears situation wasn't fair to him, but we will see. I do want to get you out of here with this then. Combine coming up or an NFL draft season, then it's going to really be about the Steelers and before they get into the summer and then training camp and then a whole new season will be here before you freaking know it, whether they have a chance or not. What do you think is the Steelers' biggest draft need for you? Some of this is clear. They have multiple needs, obviously, but what's the biggest need for you? What are a couple needs? How would you rank them? What do they need to do to eventually get themselves out of this purgatory situation where it's just 9-10 wins every year, first round exit, and we're basically saying the off seasons are pointless, even though everyone discusses them?
The objective of this offseason should be build up the team as much as they can for quarterback in 2026. That's what, in my opinion, the view should be. So when I look at their holes, I mean, they need to fill receiver, they need to fill defensive line, they need to fill corner. And I think all three of those positions, if you adequately address them this year, maybe you will need another receiver next year with Pickens, probably gone next year at some point. Maybe you need one more, but you should have most of those positions figured out. You already have
Yeah.
the young O line, right? You have the young offensive line. You have four of them that you drafted in the past two drafts that you should feel good about. You'll have guard. Okay, you could figure out what happens with Isaac Seumalo next year. But that defense is not going to have many guys on expiring deals next year either. They're going to have Patrick Queen still under contract, Peyton Wilson still under contract, Cam Hayward, TJ Watt is going into expiring deal. He'll probably be extended. Alex Highsmith, Herbig, all these guys I'm talking about, Minka Fitzpatrick, Joey Porter Jr., all these guys are under contract. And so you feel like they're going to be a part of that nucleus, that core. So if you want to compete in 2026 and you want to find, 2026, 2027 window that I think you're going to kind of try and find because you're aging defensive superstars, right? Cam Hayward has 2 more years left, probably. I think he retires at the end of his current deal. TJ Watt has how many elite years left in him? 2 or 3, maybe. He's 30 now. He's, edge rushers don't really play elite 33 years old. So how much longer can he play elite? So their biggest thing is how can we get this thing off the ground? And the best way to do it is to add so much talent this season that when that quarterback comes in, they're surrounded in a great area. And they need to QB proof this offense. I think that's the biggest thing they need to do. They need to QB proof this offense. And what I mean by that is there needs to be so much talent around that quarterback that they could become Sam Darnold with the Minnesota Vikings, right?
Yeah.
That's what needs to happen. When you look at rookie quarterbacks, and I'm talking about for next year, because again, I think this year they're not going to draft one super early. When you talk about rookie quarterbacks, they need 3 Ps: play calling, players, and so they kind of just need this, right? They kind of need these players, they need this play calling, and they need all the support from an organization. And they just need that behind them. And to do that, you need protection as well. That was the third P.
Okay, I was like, you said 3, I got
like,
2 there.
it's protection. That's what it is.
Okay, yeah.
You need
Players, play
playmakers,
calling, protection.
and play calling. Arthur Smith has a 2-year deal. Will he be back after this year? I don't know. We might be talking about a new offensive coordinator, so the coaching overhaul that might come. On top of that, when you look at the protection, they've laid the foundation, right? The foundation is there, at least for their offensive line. If they need one more, they can sign one next year. And then you look at the playmakers. That's the big part of this that I think needs to come up. They have I think they have 2 long-term answers there. I think Freiermuth is obviously going to be around, and I think Jalen Warren should be a long-term answer too. I really like him as a running back. But so they need to draft a running back if they're going to let Najee Harris walk, which I think they should do. So I think they need to draft a running back. They need to get this receiver room. They probably need to draft one, get 1 or 2 in free agency. They need to fix that room.
Yeah.
So QB proof this offense. Like, get the play calling. The protection's going to
They
come
haven't.
along.
They haven't been doing that. Yeah.
Get playmakers. You need to QB proof this offense. And then with defense, you need to make the defense. The one way they're going to win a playoff game this year is that the defense is just so good. It drags them to it, right? We talked about the
haven't seen that enough either. Yeah.
Disaster of playoff games this defense has had over the last few years. I mean, their best performance defensively, they went into Arrowhead and at least competed in that game for 2 quarters. But it was probably last year against the Bills. I know they allowed 31 points, but they were down, 3 safeties. They were down to this piecework of a linebacking room. TJ Watt didn't play, and they at least didn't get run out of the building. I thought that was if Mike Tomlin and Terrell Austin have their backs against the wall, man, do they suddenly know how to coach defense. I just wish they would do it when they had their guys. That's the thing. But either way, they need to add defensive linemen and corners. That defense is a very talented group. I think that they are either the best or the second best defensive line in football. I think they're that good this year. They just need youth on the defensive line because Cam's getting older. They need to move him around. They need more They kind of need more ingenuity up front, and they need corners. Corner room, man. That corner room sunk them so hard this year between the communication, Dante Jackson not being able to stay healthy all year, Joey Porter Jr. having every single bit of pressure thrust on him because the rest of the corner room was so bad. They need corners. And so I think, that's the 2 things defensively, defensive line and cornerback to fix. So, I mean, you really have 4 positions that you should attack, I think, with urgency. I think you should attack receiver, defensive line, cornerback, and then I think also you could throw a running back in there, not with the same level, but to some degree. So as much talent as you can. That's your object this offense this year. The Steelers should be looking this year as a building block year to see what can happen in 26, 27. Because, hey, maybe, you could strike magic. The Commanders came out of nowhere. And listen, that Commanders roster in top to bottom is not that talented.
No, not nearly. They got a lot of money to make it better, but yeah.
You find the right quarterback. And the Steelers have done this before. They were in a spot in 2003 where I think they were stagnant with Tommy Maddox. It wasn't really going well, but they had talent. They got things together. They struck lightning with Ben Roethlisberger, and boom, they win a Super Bowl 2 years later.
Yeah, and they didn't have to get Ben as a top 5 pick because Rooney and everyone's been talking about and answering questions of, do they need to just have a 3-win year and have a top 5 pick to make that QB decision easier? Or certainly if next year has a better class, do you just almost fully tank the year, which we've seen NFL franchises do? We both know they're not going to do that. They don't want to just have a 2-win year. They want the winning season. They want to get in, etc. But they managed to get Big Ben in the middle of that draft. Now, it was a deeper draft. I mean, there's multiple Hall of Famers in that draft.
Sure.
What you're figuring going to get at one day, even though Eli didn't get in, maybe Phillip Rivers will get in. Like you could have 3 Hall of Famers in that draft. That was a deeper draft, but they did get him in more in the middle of that first round. And this also is a situation, Nick, when you swing and miss off a first round quarterback in Kenny Pickett. They haven't had quarterbacks be good enough, but I think what you're saying is also very valid, that if you have enough around them, if you're just littered with playmakers, you have a great line, and you have just awesome play calling, that maybe whether it be Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson older, Justin Fields, Mason Rudolph, Trubisky, or Sam Darnold in Minnesota, quarterbacks that everyone really didn't think were that great can step up and play better and give you the best of them and have lightning in a bottle for a year or two. But they haven't been giving him that. They have not been quarterback proofing anything. So they're getting the worst of those guys and giving them no help. And they haven't been good enough. It's on them. But the team has not been nearly good enough either. So finally make that the case and then get a better quarterback to build for the future finally again. And then ask Tomlin if he wants to be about it or he wants to retire and mutually part ways and then go into a whole nother Steelers era 2-3 years from now. Problem is, as we wrap up the show, Nick, Steelers fans don't want to hear any of that because that basically makes next year pointless. And that's not what they're going to sell publicly. That's not what they're going to say in pressers. That's not what Tomlin's going to say on podcasts all off season. And the fans are not going to take that with a grain of salt either. So we're basically in the midst probably of a whole nother year of the exact same conversations all over again. And then if they do crawl in with 9 wins again, they're likely not going to be making any other major big staff changes either. And then we're just puttering this along. But can they quarterback proof the team to make the rest of this not as relevant? I think that's a big part of it. We will see Combine and onward. Nick Farabaugh, Penn Live. Thanks for hopping on, man. And I might be seeing you sometime soon.
Yeah, man. I'll see you at Indy.
Yeah, man. Nick Farabaugh, Penn Live, dropping the knowledge. We played the BS meter, and he kept it real and gave us the reality of the Steelers' upcoming season. But we'll see if that's what fans really, really want to hear. Probably not, but that probably is the reality, and they have not quarterback-proofed anything. Offense, even helping the QB with a better defense to help win games. That hasn't been the case either. And that defends anyone who wants to defend Pickett or any other quarterback that's been here. But does it really matter if you don't have the team? So Mike Asti, mic drop here with Believe in SiriusXM. Again, thanks to Nick Farabaugh of Penn Live. Read his work there. Follow him on social. And it's going to be an off season where the Steelers are in rumors, in reports. You're going to have to figure out what's BS and what's not as these months go by. We'll see what are big changes and if they really do change things and move on, but likely the same result here coming up.